My name is Bill Murphy, William Murphy, and I'm representing the Carroll County Toastmasters, and I'm interviewing Jay Hull, and today's date is May 21st, 2016, and we're located at the Carroll Media Center, Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. Jay, could you tell me when you and where you were born?
I was born in Hanover, Pennsylvania before Carroll County had a hospital. So my family lived for generations prior on the family farm on Sullivan Road here in Carroll County, Westminster.
Who are your parents and what type of occupations were they involved in?
My father was John Hall, and I'm a junior. He was a small dairy farmer. He knew how to type. Back then that was pre-computer. And so he knew how to run a small business too as well, farming. We grew up on the farm on Sullivan Road. My mother was very, very helpful. She came from a farm family, and there's some rich American history on both sides as well. My mother is still living today. She is 98 years old.
Who are or were your siblings, names and genders? Which, if any, have served in the military?
Well, because we grew up on the farm, we were pretty much exempt from the military. I was exempt until I left the farm for a period of time, and then I was drafted. As far as my siblings, I have two sisters, and the youngest sibling would be my brother. They're all local here in Carroll or close by, Carroll County.
Mm-hmm. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, actually, as I said, we grew up on the farm, and I left the farm for a period of time, and I was drafted because of that. I graduated before that in 1962 at Westminster High School, right here. And what happened after the Vietnam situation was I was drafted and went to Vietnam because that's what usually happens when you're drafted. I had a low draft number. What happened after Vietnam, basically I came back to farm with my wife, and well, before that with my father and mother, and then with my wife, and I have been a RE/MAX realtor since 1989.
And what branch of the military did you serve, Jay?
Again, because I was drafted, I went into had to go into the U.S. Army, and I was drafted, I guess because I was a farm boy and loved the outside, or knew the outside, and animal care too, that's another issue. Went into the Army and was drafted to Vietnam.
Okay. And you were drafted, you said, into the Army. What happens when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training in the Army?
The training was strength, if you will, and of course I was familiar with strength training, that kind of thing, just working on the farm. And I was drafted out of Fort Hollyburg here in Maryland, and then bused to Fort Dix in Jersey, and I had my basic training there, which was a good, more than two, actually from August into September, October, and then I had an AIT training, which was out in California in Monterey. AIT training was advanced training beyond basic.
Do you recall your instructors? If so, what were they like?
I'm sure we all remember some. Drill Sergeant Ford was a special dude. He at the time, he was not allowed to touch the trainees or the basic training people because in years past they could beat them up if they wanted to. But just one look and hearing from Drill Sergeant Ford, you wanted to do everything he said. But he was very special because he was not allowed to touch you. So he would point to my button or our button, through the training if at a dress up or kind of dress up situation. He was very good. I was amazed. A lot of good guys in basic training that went on elsewhere. We didn't stay together for the following AIT training. During basic training, they had National Guard or Reserve drill sergeants come in to relieve Drill Sergeant Ford. And it was hot summer, hot, humid in Jersey, and they ran the heck out of us without letting us drink water. So a lot of us fell down because we were dehydrated and just fainted. They didn't know what they were doing. So that made me feel even more special about Drill Sergeant Ford because he didn't let that happen.
Did you receive any specialized training in the military?
Of course. On my form, when I get out of the military, it lists search and survival training, which was also in the AIT training, the Geneva Convention rules and some of the information. We had to have that before we went anywhere, pretty much. The AIT training, obviously, was a little more advanced than basic.
How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, and social life?
Well, at the time, I think the food was superior to what it was in years past for someone that may have been in Korea or World War II. I don't know for sure, but got the impression that the food was pretty good. We just had to be very careful of placing the amount of food on our tray or plate, and if we didn't eat it and left it, they made us eat it. So we had to be very careful about that.
All right. Let's talk about your wartime service. You were in the Vietnam era. Where did you serve?
Actually, I was drafted in 1969 and was there in 70, 71. So that was when the war was winding down. But because I had received the training in infantry, they sent me right out in the field. When we first went into Vietnam, there was a base of entry near the South China Sea, southern part of Vietnam, and the training was still basic, a little bit of training to orient us towards the climate a little bit, and they also asked other people to become an assistant medic. So I volunteered to become an assistant medic, and after 6 or 8 hours of training, plus my farm experience with animal care, they gave me a bag of $200 worth of meds, bandages, and gauze or whatever, and morphine. So that was preparation before I went out on my first mission.
If you served abroad, what are some of your memories of what you have over in Vietnam?
Well, it's pretty hard to forget a lot of the war stories, because we were infantry and we had 2-week missions, or sometimes a 1-afternoon mission, guided by the lieutenant or the colonel or whoever was in charge. A lot of times we were not made aware of the reason for the mission, so we were sent out on these individual missions not knowing exactly what we were looking for per se and why. But yes, it was quite an experience. I do remember my very first day of my very first 2-week mission. The war story goes that we were all sent out by the helicopters that had their side doors open, and there were 3 veterans or 3 platoon members on each side of the helicopter, open door, and we were flown out in, I think, a series of 4 helicopters following out to a free fire zone. And that free fire zone is what's called, or is called that because anything that we saw, we could shoot. So we would go to some places like Dragon Valley, that was I guess an Army name for the area. It may not have been the real name. So the first mission was flown out, our 20-member platoon in the 4 helicopters with 80-pound backpacks on each of our backs, and then my medical bag on top of that. My M16 in hand, ammo, cartridges in the side pockets, and a lot of times we would carry hot water or hot sodas in the side pockets that we had of our so-called platoon uniform. We were dropped off by the helicopter, and we were walking a stretch through the free fire zone in a kind of a, not necessarily swampy, but dry swamp area, and then up a tree line per se. It's very similar to our vegetation here. And the first 2 walked up through the woods, and the first 2 were shot. This is the first day of my first mission. The radio man, part of the platoon, called in a medevac helicopter. We called them birds. And the medevac came in, hovering over top of us in the woods. And I worked on the first guy that got shot. The regular medic worked on the second guy. So the radio guy didn't call in the right thing to drop down to take them back up to the helicopter. It was a 3-pronged thing that we had to put them over top their injured leg. They were shot. Mine was shot. The guy that I worked on was shot in the leg. So they started to raise one by one up to the helicopter, and then the enemy started shooting at the helicopter. So somehow the helicopter managed to take both of the platoon guys that were shot back, and we had to leave the area. And we kind of retrieved, going back in a line, and I was the second to the last guy retrieving with my weapons turned towards them, the enemy. And that evening, it wasn't the cool air because it was a human, but I couldn't stop shaking knowing what had happened. That was my first day on my first mission. Okay? There are other stories that I can tell, maybe not necessarily here, but that gives you an idea of what we were dealing with. Even though the Vietnam War was winding down, I was involved with that kind of connection or imagery.
Do you think the fact that you were a farm boy that really helped you to get involved with the problems of Vietnam, for example, all this weight that you were carrying and everything, you must have been in very, very good shape.
Well, a lot of us had the training and for that. So, and of course we were young then. But again, the question, I'm sorry. I think the animal care on the farm helped with knowing a little bit about the medic, in addition to what they taught us with the assistant medic training, if you will.
What do you remember of the times that you were involved in the combat there? Anything else that specifically you remember about that your whole life? On another one afternoon mission, the helicopters flew us in just for the afternoon or an hour or two. And the water buffaloes were herded by the Vietnamese. We don't know whether they were the enemy or not. But they herded the buffalo out of the area when the helicopters came in to land. And so we were part of 2 area search parties from the helicopter platoon
One went the other way and I went another way. And the other guy or the other part of the platoon went down through a path. And in essence, that first person tripped a wire that blew up in the path and injured his leg. That person also was from Pennsylvania, and I think he had shown sheep at the Pennsylvania Farm Show before he had been in Vietnam. We were fortunate because we went the other way, I guess, and in searching the area, I looked underneath a bush, a green bush, and I saw a green bag with a drawstring or rope on it. I pulled the bag out from underneath this shrub or tree. It was probably a shrub instead of a tree. And the other trained medic got mad at me because he said it could have been tripped, or I could have tripped a wire or tripped the explosive. But I pulled it out before he said anything, and I opened it up, and there was this huge dry, square, rectangle-shaped, what appeared to be rice. And then there were some intelligence papers along with it. So because of that, the lieutenant and we sent that back, or the lieutenant took care of it and sent that back to intelligence. I don't know what became of it, but that was what we were involved with.
Very good. What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and with whom?
Well, actually, it was very easy to be a friendship, or be a friend, if you will, with the guys in the platoon, because we were all trying to survive. And there was some pretty amazing guys, really, from all walks of life, pretty much. One of the reasons why I like to document or discuss, what I do is because one of the guys was killed in action, and he is memorialized on the Vietnam War wall in Washington, D.C. His name is Joe Love, L-O-V-E. He was from Texas. I think he had a child before he went to Vietnam, but he had a wonderful personality. He was in my initial platoon. Through months after that, he decided he wanted to become a door gunner on the side of, there were two door gunners on either side of the helicopter. So he opted to do that. He thought that would be better than just walking the woods like we were doing. And he was out on a mission. This was months after my first mission. They were out on a mission to rescue, and he was out off of the helicopter trying to rescue someone, and he was shot and killed. So this is the main reason why I like to share. It needs to be preserved. Obviously, he's already been memorialized on the wall, but it needs to be discussed. He had a wonderful personality. He was a Black American. And the friendships, obviously, we had a situation where, I guess that's the case, there were different levels of platoon members. As far as being in the platoon, there were quite a few of us that were new to the platoon, but there was quite a few of others in the platoon that had been there different time frames as a unit.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
We were very fortunate that we could write letters. Nowadays, I think they have like the computer and may be allowed to do a service phone, I don't know. But I wrote letters, and I thought it was very important to write about what was happening because I thought my parents needed to know. They were home working hard on the farm. And some of the letters have been documented with the Carroll County Historical Society. And I've documented a lot of the information we're talking about today with the Francis Scott Key High School Veterans Celebration, which is held every November usually. And they do an excellent job with that celebration every year.
What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
Good question. We had usually 2 to 3 days in between each 2-week mission, okay? And that meant that we were able to get some cool drinks. instead of hot sodas that would only last a day or two on the 2-week mission, maybe. And we were able to catch up on some rest because when we were out in the free fire zone, it was a different schedule. We could catch up on some rest. They showed some horror movies, and I guess that was for a reason. I wasn't into that, but I'm sure there's a reason to keep us alert, if you will. And then some of them, the other platoon members, they would smoke marijuana. I don't know where they got it. Of course, it was available then or there. And so sometimes I had to not sniff, but smell it because I was around them. So that was my only experience with marijuana since, really. Good guys, though.
Did you go anywhere with R&R as far as did they fly you out or anything during that time, Jay?
2/3 of my time in Vietnam, I had an R&R to Australia, which is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Other platoon members or other service members in Vietnam had choices to go to Thailand and some other places. I chose to go to Australia. It was somewhat of a prearranged because of the farm associations with farms in Australia. And I had prearranged a visit with a farm family that had some cattle that I was affiliated with, or we were affiliated with, and visited and stayed overnight with them and the family and visited or viewed their farm operation somewhat. And also was able to fly from Sydney, Australia to Melbourne for the Rural Winter Fair at the time. Somehow it happened at the same time I was there. And the first evening that I was there, the cattle company, cattle club people from the fair with the same cattle group that we're familiar with invited me to their cattle club, dress-up cattle club meeting at the fair. And before they even started their meeting, they had me stand up, and they sang our national anthem, and then they sang their Australian national anthem. And I was totally blown away. I was almost in tears. It was unbelievable with the gratitude, the respect, and it was unbelievable.
All right. Where were you when the war, your time in the service, ended?
It's a 21-hour flight from Vietnam by way of stops in Philippines and Alaska and I think it was Philippines, Japan, Alaska, and then Washington State, Fort Lewis. And we were flown into Fort Lewis about 1 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of the guys, well, before that, I need to talk about that. But anyhow, we had drug tests to prove that we were drug-free before we could even come home. And that was a special situation with some guys that couldn't pass the test. Anyhow, we flew into Fort Lewis in the plane, and as soon as we got off the plane, there were certain guys that had to kiss the concrete or the ground because they were back in USA. And because it was 1 o'clock in the morning, they told us to get cleaned up, shower, and we had a 2 a.m. breakfast with steak and eggs. That was our coming back home. And I still had service to finish up after I came back from Vietnam. So I knew I had training, or not training, but service still left. And I did fly into Dallas, Texas before I came home and to see my wife-to-be, if you will, and then flew back home in Maryland before I went back to, I think it was Fort Collins, Colorado, to finish off my service. Because I was drafted, I think I was only there for about 2 years, barely 2 years, total service, if you will. It was about 9.5 months in Vietnam because of the winding down of the war at the time by President Nixon.
How were you received by your family and community?
Very well. I didn't experience anything like some others did with assaults because I think Vietnam was labeled as the baby killer, people with us killing babies. I was in, by the way, to backtrack a little bit, I was in Chu Lai and Da Nang, but Chu Lai is where Lieutenant Calley and his group supposedly killed families that were supposed to be enemies, I guess. And so that's where this baby killers thing was originated, if you will. I was there in Chu Lai way after Lieutenant Calley's situation. So a lot of people thought because it was televised on TV here in the country that we were all baby killers, apparently. And I went straight back to the farm, and everybody, was glad that I was, and they wanted to hear the stories, my stories. But other people that flew back to their areas or flew into, in one case flew into the Chicago O'Hare Airport, and they were literally assaulted by anti-war or anti-American, I guess. So I was very fortunate. People were glad that I was back.
How did you readjust to civilian life? And just tell us a little bit about yourself, of what you've done, in your civilian life.
Actually, I think, as I mentioned maybe before the interview started, that our family has some rich American history stories handed down, both on my mother's side and also my father's side. And because I'm from Carroll County, my mother has a family Civil War story, basically that was involved with, and there's a Russian spy story that was also involved with her family too as well. My father was involved on the family farm with German war prisoners during World War II. And so if I could expand on all of that at another time possibly. I think it's because of the many, many generations being here. I grew up on the farm. I think it was very easy to know the work ethic and the military discipline and that kind of thing. The business strategy is very similar to military strategy, if you will. Okay, so I didn't have any problem. I don't have anything that's indicates that I may be something other than normal. I don't think so.